Hello again, and welcome to another episode of Shardcast. I am your host, Aaron Froat, as we bring you the final game of the North America West Pool matchup of the second Hex Streamers Tournament, brought to you by Hex TCG Pro and Hexcasters. Today's matchup will feature Errantsquire playing a wild deck, featuring a mirror matchup against Muuko, both running the Running Deer champion, and they are just about to set to go to the coin flip. I will take you out there right now. As here comes the coin flip, and it was won by Muuko. As we take a look at this matchup from Errantsquire's point of view, Errantsquire will look at his starting hand as he waits for Muuko to decide on his. Errantsquire is looking at 5 Wild Shards, a Howling Brave, and a Crazed Squirrel Titan. Muuko and Errantsquire make sure they're on the same page in the Streamers Tournament. Part of the qualification was you had to be an active streamer. So they're making sure both streams are up so that the tournament director can make sure that everything stays according to plan. Both streams are now up. So Muuko will decide on his starting hand. Muuko goes down to 6 and will pass it over to Errantsquire. Errantsquire again looking at 5 Wild Shards, but will keep his hand with the Howling Brave in there. And Muuko will start us off on this Day 5 matchup between Errantsquire and Muuko. Errantsquire draws a card and drops a Wild Shard, followed by Howling Brave. That again is a 1/1 troop for 1. That gives you an additional Wild Threshold, bringing his threshold up to 2, and exhaust for 1 temporary resource. So Muuko will pass turn over to Errantsquire. We can only assume that Errantsquire is going to have the same play looking at his hand. And it looks like Errantsquire recognizes the mirror matchup right off the bat. Errantsquire will draw for his first turn, draws a Dandelion Sprite, plays a Wild Shard, and plays his copy of Howling Brave. So a mirror matchup we do have. Errantsquire will pass his turn back over to Muuko. Again, the winner of this matchup wraps up the third and final seed to move on to the bracket round, so this is a huge important matchup. Muuko plays a second shard for a third threshold, and plays Dandelion Sprite, which is a 2-drop, 1/2 troop. That as long as you have 3 Wild Threshold, it has Flight and Spell Shield. So he will swing with the Howling Brave, trying to bait Errantsquire into trading off the Howling Brave and losing his ramp. He'll not take the bait, but instead take the 1 damage. So Errantsquire will go down to 19 health as soon as his damage is passed across the board here. Here we go. Muuko out of resources. Will pass his turn over to Errantsquire. And you have to assume Errantsquire is going to play the same exact play. So this is definitely the definition of a mirror matchup. Not necessarily just the same decks, but the same exact plays starting off the first 2 turns. Errantsquire plays his Wild Shard, and as he drew a Chaos Key, thought about it for a second, but instead drops his copy of the Dandelion Sprite. So we are indeed in a mirror matchup. Muuko having the slight advantage of playing first in the matchup, so he does have the higher health total of 20 to 19. Muuko draws a card for his start of the third turn, drops another Wild Shard, exhausts the Howling Brave, bringing himself up to 4 resources, and plays a Honeycap. Honeycap is a 4-drop that is 0/0, but gets +1/+1 as it enters play, equal the number of Wild Threshold you have. Muuko having 4 Wild Threshold. So Honeycap comes out as a 4/4, and he will pass turn. Errantsquire, unless he draws a Honeycap, will finally see the mirror break off from Exact Duplicate. He instead draws a Crash of Beasts. And you have to assume that's what would come out this turn. He plays a Wild Shard, and let's see if he tries to play the Chaos Key or not. Chaos Key doesn't really help him here. Yep, here comes Crash of Beasts. which isn't a great play, but it's good to have out there and shuffle back in his deck, because the Honeycap is still stronger at 4/4. The Crash of Beast puts a 3/3 Rhinoceros out there with Crush, and with Escalation shuffles back into his deck, and we'll place 2 Rhinoceri out there next turn. Rhinoceri or Rhinoceroses, I believe it's Rhinoceri. Either way, we'll move on to turn 4. Muuko draws a card, plays another shard, and plays a Munario Sensei, which is a 1/1, allows him to draw a card. Immediately plays his Champion Power. Running Deer says if you have 4 shards, you can get 5 health back, so he uses that. Plays another Sensei, draws another card. Exhausts his Howling Brave and plays a second Howling Brave. So Muuko went from 3 troops on the board to 6 on this turn. 2 copies of Howling Brave, 2 copies of Munario Sensei, a 4/4 Honeycap, and a Dandelion Sprite. Trying to decide if he's going to attack here or not. He chooses not to. Out of resources, he will pass his turn back over to Errantsquire. Muuko trying to put a board presence out there. You saw him play an aggro deck against Function in the previous game we broadcast to you on Shardcast. Errantsquire on his 4th turn. Oh, got a little bit of a flip there. Looks like he drew another wild shard. Let's see, there we go. Sorry about that. That puts his champion charge level up to 4, so he will go ahead and use his charge power and go back up to 24 health. Here he drops his Chaos Key. You'd have to think if Muuko has an Onslaught here, that might... Let's see. No, not quite yet. Muuko's got 5, 9 damage, plus 18 from Onslaught's 27. He can block 6, so he wouldn't quite be able to get there yet. Plays another shard. See what Muuko, if he plays his last card in hand. He exhausts the Howling Brave to put a Crazed Scroll Titan out there. Crazed Scroll Titan is a 4/5 for 6, and can attack a target troop when it comes into play. He's going to choose to attack the Rhinoceros, who only has 3 damage. The 4 attack will knock it off the board. And Muuko will swing for 5. The 4/4 Honeycap and the 1/2 Dandelion Sprite. Errantsquire will block the Dandelion Sprite with the 1 of his own, so they will just trade damage, but both will stay on the board. Errantsquire will go down to 10 now. I'm sorry, go down to 20. I apologize. 20. And this is where you see Muuko within Onslaught range. Onslaught is a wild card that gives every troop you control +3/+3 and crush until end of turn. Errantsquire instead plays the Wild Shard as he draws a Chlorophylla. Taps the Howling Brave, gives him 6 resources, so he plays the Crazed Scroll Titan of his own and pulls the Honeycap off the board. And we have to see Errantsquire may or may not attack with his Sprite. No, he'll keep it back to block. And they're almost at a race at this point in time. Muuko has no cards in hand as he moves to his 6th turn. Draws a card. And let's see if he plays that card on the first main phase or not. He chooses not to move to his attack phase. Skips his attack phase. Because right now anything aside from the Scroll Titan doesn't do him any good, but the Scroll Titans would trade. Actually, they'd trade damage to each other, but both would stay on the board. Errantsquire draws a Wild Root Dancer. This could very well put him ahead, as he puts it on the board, and will no doubt follow that with a Wild Shard and probably buff up the Dandelion Sprite. Plays the Wild Shard. The Wild Root Dancer's +2/+2 buff as a resource comes into play. Gives it to the Dandelion Sprite, so he'll swing for 3. The only blocker Muuko has is his own Dandelion Sprite, which is only a 1/2, and it would just kill it. And Muuko takes the damage, going down to 22 health. Second main, we'll see if Errantsquire plays the Chlorophylla. He does not. He holds it back for a bluff. Many players don't like to go down to 0 cards in hand because it gives the opponent too much information. And the Chlorophylla really doesn't help Errantsquire at this point in time. Muuko draws a honey cap off the top of the deck and goes ahead and plays it immediately. I'm sorry, he could have either drawn that or the shard because he played a shard as well. So the honey cap comes out as an 8/8. You have to assume that's going to be Chaos Key on the next turn. Chaos Key, if you exhaust it and pay 5 resources, you can void a target card. But you also have to void the Chaos Key, so it's a one-shot deal when you have to use it on your turn as a basic action. Errantsquire takes the 1 damage from the Dandelion Sprite on the chin. And we'll move to his turn. He draws another copy of Chlorophylla. Again, not really a helpful card here. He does go ahead and Chaos Key the honey cap, so both will leave the board. And you have to assume the advantage swings back in Errantsquire's favor here with the Wild Root Dancer on the board, because he can keep pumping up that Dandelion Sprite. As it does have Spell Shield, so removing it from the board is very difficult. Spell Shield prevents it from being targeted from any target spell. So any target removal or target burn wouldn't do anything to it. So even a Turbulence, which is a destroy flying creature, couldn't affect Dandelion Sprite at this point in time. Turn 8 for Muuko. He top decks. Passes on his first main phase. He chooses to attack with a Sprite because it can go unblocked as it's the only flying creature out there available. As Errantsquire's Dandelion Sprite is still exhausted from his attack step. Errantsquire down to 18, Muuko at 19. Both champions have 2 charges. Errantsquire top decks the Fist of Brigadon, and with enough resources, I would imagine we'll see that come out here, probably in the second main phase. Errantsquire swings with the Dandelion Sprite, uncontested, so that will bring Muuko down to 16. Second main phase, out comes the Fist of Brigadon. It's a 6/6 for 6 and 6 Wild Threshold. That has Crush and Invincible, but it must attack each turn if able. So it's able to stay back to block 1 turn. Other than that, it's going to be attacking each turn. Passes turn over to Muuko. Muuko drops a Wild Shard, still has 1 more card in hand. And we'll see if he has any answer for Fist of Brigadon. Nope, he goes ahead and just concedes. So Errantsquire will take game 1, as he has no answer for the Fist of Brigadon. Let's go ahead and take a second look at that Crazed Squirrel Titan, as we take a look at Errantsquire sideboarding here. The Crazed Squirrel Titan is a 4/5 for 6 cost, 2 Wild Threshold. And when it enters play, it can attack target opposing troop. So immediately he can deal 4 damage to an opposing troop, but he must make sure that troop doesn't deal 5 back, or else it just removes itself from the board. So it's almost like its own very own attack phase. So we're going to sit there and wait for these 2 opponents to go to game 2. Again, if Errantsquire wins game 2, he wins the match and locks up that 3rd seed in the pool going towards the bracket round. It would knock Muuko out. So this is, again, a huge match, as this is the final match in the North America West pool of the 2nd Hex Streamers tournament, brought to you by Hex TCG Pro and Hexcasters. And we'll take you out to the coin flip for game 2 in just a moment, as the sideboards are entered into the tournament director. And here we go. Coin flip. This time it's won by Errantsquire, as we take a look at his starting hand. Decent starting hand here. He's got 3 Wild Shards, a Howling Brave, Dandelion Sprite, Wild Root Dancer, and Fist of Brigadon he will choose to keep. Passes over to Muuko to look at his hand, decide whether he wants to mulligan. He chooses to keep his hand, and we have the start of game 2. Carbon copy of last game. Wild Shard followed by Howling Brave. As Muuko and Errantsquire exchange a few pleasantries. Errantsquire will pass turn over to Muuko. We'll see if we have a mirror matchup again. Same thing. Wild Shard, Howling Brave. So starting off the same way as we did last game, we got to hope it works out better for Muuko. If not, again, Errantsquire will wrap up the third seed and move on to the bracket round. Errantsquire's second turn, he draws a Wild Root Dancer, so he has double Wild Root Dancer. Let's go ahead and take a look at that card real quick as we check and see what Errantsquire is going to choose to do here, whether he plays the Wild Root Dancer or not. There's the Wild Root Dancer. Sorry about that. Wild Root Dancer again is a 2/2 for 3, and whenever a resource enters play, it gives a 2/2 permanent buff to another target troop, so it can't buff itself. So it will pass turn over. The only thing scary about putting a Wild Root Dancer out without being able to use its buff immediately is it can be removed from the board and loses all of its power practically. But playing against a mono wild deck, that threat is minimalized. Muuko plays a Chlorophylla on his second turn. So he's looking to ramp up here. In the meantime, Errantsquire can go Wild Root Dancer on his next turn and buff each other's Wild Root Dancer up. It says another target troop, but it doesn't say you can't target another Wild Root Dancer. I imagine he's going to go Wild Root Dancer and make both Dancers a 4/4. Yep, there's the exhaust to give him 3 resources. Here comes the second Wild Root Dancer. Here comes the Shard to activate the abilities. And they will buff each other up. So Errantsquire on the offensive early here. That's going to pose a major threat to Muuko early on, and he will deal 4 damage to Muuko on turn 3. Not a bad setup. Muuko goes down to 16 health. Errantsquire with 1 resource remaining in his pool cannot play it, as he's holding on to a Wild Shard, Dandelion Sprite, and Fist of Brigadon. It will pass turn back over to Muuko. Muuko's third turn. Drops another Wild Shard. Exhausts the Howling Brave, give him 6 resources for the turn, and plays a Crazed Scroll Titan. You gotta imagine that's going to take one of the Wild Root Dancers off the board. Again, as it comes in, it immediately attacks another opposing troop. So he does take the Wild Root Dancer off the board. So board state kind of evens out here, as Muuko has a 1/1 and a 4/5, and Errantsquire has a 1/1 and a 4/4. Let's see if Errantsquire plays. He drew a Sensei. He'll probably play the Sprite and buff it up to a 3/5. 3/4 if I could math here. Because it would be the only flying creature on the board. He's going to go ahead and exhaust the Howling Brave to play a Sensei first. Allow him to draw cards, as it allows you to draw cards as it enters play. He draws another Wild Shard. So he will go ahead and probably play a Shard for turn and buff the Sprite. Down goes the Shard. There goes the buff to the Sprite. So the Sprite's now a 3/4 with Flight and Spell Shield. And unless Muuko has an answer for that, he now has set a clock on Muuko. Errantsquire cannot attack with the Root Dancer this turn, but because of that 4th Shard drop, he can use his champion ability and go up to 25 health. He does. The one thing about Muuko is another Shard drop would allow him to get 5 health as well, and kind of increase that clock that Errantsquire put on him. But you have to imagine next turn that Errantsquire will drop the Fist of Brigadon. He won't be able to buff the Fist of Brigadon because he has to use that Wild Shard first in order to play him. It would have been ideal to be able to drop the Fist and then buff him to make him an 8/8. But instead he'll probably drop the Fist and buff this Dandelion Sprite again. Either way, Muuko drops another Wild Shard. Plays another Howling Brave. He has 6 resources for turn. Now down to 5 as he plays the Brave, which gives him 8 threshold. He will play an 8/8 Honey Cap after he plays his champion ability, going up to 21 health. The Honey Cap with 8 threshold is now an 8/8 and proves to be a menace. So Muuko, trying to turn the tables and put some pressure on Errantsquire, will swing the Scroll Titan, because unless Errantsquire wants to double block, it will not die. So he will deal the 4 damage, and we have a tie game here at 21-21. Muuko trying to hold on and apply some pressure to force a game 3 here. Again, Errantsquire won game 1. Errantsquire draws a wild shard. Again, he can't buff the Fist of Brigadon this turn, because he has to play a shard first with only the one Howling Brave to be able to play in this turn. So he exhausts the Howling Brave. I think he's just now realizing he can't do that. Yep, so he goes and plays the shard first. He'll have to buff up the sprite. Probably like to play the Fist of Brigadon on on the second main phase. He can, however, swing with the sprite because it is flying, and Muuko has no flying troops on his side, so it would be 5 damage uncontested. And with the number of wild shards in his hand, we're looking at a 3-turn clock after this, as we'll be able to make a Dandelion Sprite a 7/8 next turn, which I would imagine until Muuko has an answer for the sprite, I have to think he'd continue to buff the Dandelion Sprite, as they can't be blocked. We'll see how he chooses to approach this either way. He passes turn over to Muuko. Muuko draws a card, plays the Secret Laboratory. That is a 3-drop artifact that if you pay 1 resource and exhaust it, you can draw a card, then choose and discard a card in response. If exhausted immediately, goes down to 2 resources. Draws a card, discards a Honey Cap, has 2 cards in hand remaining, plays a shard for turn, exhausts the Howling Brave, that goes back up to 4 resources, plays a Honey Cap, which eliminates any cards left in his hand. That will be a 9/9 Honey Cap, putting some serious pressure on Errantsquire here. The one thing about Honey Cap, though, is they do not have Crush. They can be blocked by the 1/1 Sensei or even the 1/1 Howling Brave, and no damage will go through. That's why you can see it is a common card by the white logo at the very bottom of the card, as opposed to, say, the blue logo at the bottom of the Wild Root Dancer, which makes it a rare, or a red at the bottom of the fist, which makes it a legendary card. Errantsquire draws another shard. That will be what he wants to continue to draw, as that will continue to buff his cards from the Wild Root Dancer. He'll play a shard, and it looks like he's going to buff the fist. I think with it being invincible, attacking each turn, I think he's trying to be able to get some extra damage through, but I think I would have kept buffing the sprite here, as the sprite can't be blocked. It's a flying troop, and Muuko has no flying troops. Yes, he chooses to block with the Honey Cap. See, right there, he could have done 7 damage instead of just 5, and pretty much put a... That would have done 7 damage, bring him down to 9 health. The Wild Shard next time would bring the sprite up to 9. He could have ended the next turn. So I think a little bit of a misstep there by Errantsquire, although he is still in the driver's seat. Here comes the Dandelion Sprite. So in hindsight, that may not have been a bad play, although he didn't know Muuko was going to top deck the sprite to be able to block the sprite of his own. Muuko chooses to swing with the Trey Scroll Titan and the 8/8 Honey Cap, leaving the 9/9 back to block. I would imagine... Yep, Errantsquire sacrifices the Sensei to the Honey Cap and will take the 4 damage instead, going down to 17. 17 health for Errantsquire, 11 for Muuko. And let's see what Errantsquire draws for his turn. More shards means more damage. Draws another shard. So with 2 shards in hand, he'll play one of them, utilizing the Wild Root Dancer's buffing ability. He chooses to increase the attack and defense of the fist, making it a 10/10, and it must attack each turn as if able. So it immediately swings and move to the attack phase. He also attacks with the Dandelion Sprite, who's 5/6, and Muuko has to block here. That would be lethal damage. So let's see how Muuko does here. He'll probably block the sprite with the sprite of his own and let the 10 damage go through, bring him down to 1. But without another flying creature off the top of the deck, that would be game next turn. Let's see what Muuko decides to do here. Because he's in a hard spot, because if he tries to block the fist with, say, the 9/9 Honey Cap and only take the 1 damage, it buys him 1 turn, but the fist is invincible, so he can't double block and kill it, because it can't die to combat damage. The only way a Fist of Brigadon can be taken from the battlefield is if you decrease its defense using permanent abilities to 0, or you can Chaos Key it off the board. Yep, Muuko decides to block the sprite with the sprite of his own and let the 10 go through, lowering him to 1 health. He has to top deck a flying blocker here. or else the Dandelion Sprite will go through uncontested, and that will be the game and the match for Errantsquire. Here comes the draw. Card in hand. Exhausted Secret Laboratory. Obviously, that was not a flying blocker. He wants to trade it for another one. Draws a card. Chooses to discard a Wild Shard. That's a Chlorophyll. That will be game. That's game for Errantsquire. That will be the match. Muuko has no response for the Dandelion Sprite, who's flying and dealing more than 1 damage. Muuko has no way to deal lethal damage here. He can swing for lethal damage as he swings for 21-23. The Errantsquire can block one of the Honeycaps with his Howling Brave and lower the damage to less than lethal, and he will choose to do that. That is game. Well played by both players. Errantsquire seemed to get the upper hand both games by getting that Wild Root Dancer out this game. Last game it was the Crazed Scroll Titan out first. You see Errantsquire go down to 4 health. If he really needed to, he could play his Wild Shard next turn and go back up to 9 with the Champion Power, but he won't need to. That will be game, set, match for Errantsquire, and that will be the final game of our Northwest Tournament pool. Errantsquire draws another Wild Shard, no point in even playing it. We will go ahead and move on to the attack phase instead of adding insult to injury here. That's a good sport, good sportsmanship. Swings the 5 damage through. And Muuko will take the damage, and that is the game. Excellent match there by Errantsquire, and he will move on to the bracket round with that victory, as that solidifies the 3rd and final seed as we take a look at the standings at the end of the pool play for the North American West Coast pool of the 2nd Streamers Tournament, brought to you by Hexcasters and Hex TCG Pro. Function Fails finishes with the 1st place seed, as he finishes with the same points scored and the same record as Hacky, but he did beat Hacky on day 1, so that locks up the 1st seed. Hacky will take seed number 2, and with that victory, Muuko will take the 3rd seed. And it was a overall wonderful set of matches here in the 5 days by the contestants. As we take a look at what may be probably a even playing field going into the bracket round. I know Errantsquire gave Function a run for his money, and Hacky holding his own, only having the 1 match loss. So this will be 3 formidable opponents coming out of the West bracket. Hopefully they will move on towards the semifinals and the finals. We wish them the best of luck. I would like to give another and final shout out to Hexcasters and Hex TCG Pro for putting on this wonderful tournament. Check out the links at the bottom of the page underneath this Shardcast, as I will have links there to the Twitch pages and the YouTube channels of the contestants and for Hexcasters. That way you can click on them, go to their pages, and make sure you subscribe to their channels, follow them on Twitter, do what you can to support them as they continue to support our players and support me and Shardcast. So again, final matchup of the day, Errantsquire takes out Muuko as we lock up the last and final spot of the pool. We ask that you tune in again in the future as we bring you additional Shardcasts. Until then, my name is Fruitlevania, and so long.